All of the English classes that I take contribute bit by bit to building and improving my critical reading skills. This semester of English 201 was no exception, and even after this class is over, I will continue to use the skills and devices that I've learned. Downloading and using the reader response worksheets really helped me organize my thoughts. I was looking back at all of the ones that I filled out, and the one that really stood out to me was the one I did for the short story A and P by John Updike. I noticed that I had more questions for the author in this story rather than all of the others, but it isn't because I didn't understand it or it was difficult to read. I just wanted to know more about the background of the story, meaning what influenced the author to write it in the first place. The first time I read through the story, I was looking intently for a deeper hidden meaning, but I couldn't come up with anything solid. After rereading and looking back at my annotations, I came to the conclusion that Updike was trying to convey that the notion that people are easily influenced by their innate desires, especially younger people whose brains are not fully developed and who have less experience. I started to fill out the reader response worksheet after I read the story for the first time, but I didn't complete it. Instead, I looked back to it when I finished the second reading and compared my new thoughts with my original ones. This made it easier for me to come to a conclusion that I was happy with and could fully understand. When reading each of the short stories, I made sure to look back at the sheet with the list of the rhetorical devices. During the first reading, though, I would usually just annotate things and that jumped out at me. It was during the times that I reread the stories that I would point out and label any rhetorical devices that I could find, and some that I wasn't so sure about. Doing this made it noticeably easier to fill out critical analysis documents and give examples. I also used a digital highlighter at some points instead of an annotation. I usually did this when I thought there was something to analyze deeper, but I wasn't sure at the time what it was. So I highlighted it and saved it for later, and when I had more information and a better understanding as to what it was I should be looking for. For example, in Two Kinds by Amy Tan, when the daughter goes back to visit her mother after having grown up and moved out, the mother offers the piano back to her. At first, she doesn't want it, but her mom convinces her to take it. The daughter then describes it as a trophy she won back. I was a little confused as to why she referred to it as a trophy, since it seemed to have dominated her childhood in such a negative way. But after annotating, rereading, and highlighting, I looked back and realized that she called it a trophy because she now had control over whether or not she would accept it, and she felt as if she had won the long argument with her mother about her life being her own and not something her mother could control. One of the most memorable tools I used for this class was the ability to digitally annotate. I found it much easier than and cleaner than writing, erasing, and scratching out my annotations by hand. It was also easier to save, and there was no way that I would misplace it because everything would always be on my laptop, and I always know where that is. I also liked the downloadable worksheets that I could fill out on my laptop and then immediately upload it with my answers. Having everything available for me digitally just keeps me more organized in general, and having pre-written things that I just simply have to fill out makes it even better. This English class obviously reminded me of the others I had been in before, mostly in junior and senior year of high school, because in the years before that I felt like I just didn't do as many in-depth kind of things. Other than that, there are different situations where I utilize some of the skills that I learned in this class. For example, I can use critical thinking to work through everyday problems such as scheduling classes for next semester. Instead of just sitting and thinking about what to do and getting overwhelmed by how I'll be able to juggle it, I sit down and I have a physical schedule to write down my different classes and times. Once I see it all written down in front of me, though, I can see I was just overcomplicating it, and all I needed to do was make sure that all the times fit, and I could make it to all of my classes. And this kind of connects with the way that I would be able to fill out the pre-made worksheets with my thoughts and everything, and have it all right in front of me so I could see it, and not have to just make everything up in my mind as I went. I did encounter a few challenges when trying to fill out the reader response or critical analysis sheets. There were a few times when it took me quite a long time to come up with questions to ask the authors. I either didn't have anything to ask because I understood the story, or I didn't know what to ask because it was confusing. For example, when reading Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway, I was stumped for a while about what to ask. The questions were the last part I did, and as you can see, they're not the most in-depth questions. I think it's because the story itself was a little bit confusing to me, and no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't decipher the deeper meaning behind whatever the operation was supposed to symbolize, or if it actually even symbolized anything. My most memorable experience in the class is actually one that I didn't find very pleasant. I thought the Flipgrids were a very interesting idea, and they can be useful for classes that sometimes meet online and sometimes meet in person, like blended classes, or for a class that was canceled but the professor still wants to have something for the students to do anyway. But for a class that's solely online, I just felt like it was a little bit out of place to include Flipgrids. I probably only feel that way because public speaking is very high on the list of things that I do not enjoy, and even if it is through a screen, I still get most of that same anxiety. I also wrote scripts for all of my Flipgrids and practiced them many times because I knew it was impossible for me to just start recording and keep talking without a bunch of unnecessary pauses and awkward stuttering. And finally, my aha moment. In all of the other English classes I've taken in high school, I would read a story once, not annotate or highlight anything, and then just be done. The only time I would look back at whatever text we were reading is when I needed a specific example or a quote. In this class, however, I read the story more than once, sometimes even more than twice, and I actually wrote down my thoughts as I was reading. This made it a lot easier for me to do the final assignments for the text, and it really helped me actually understand what it was that I was reading. And I'll most definitely continue to highlight and annotate, whether it be digitally or by hand. Also, here's where the YouTube link will be for the video that you're watching. And here are the links to the images that I used because I most certainly did not create any of them. Thank you.